Hey everybody. Well, tonight we're going to do another video. We're going to build an image from start to finish, and this one will be a forest scene, and we'll maybe throw a deer in. Should have some fun. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are in Vue, and I'm just going to start by creating a terrain for the foreground. And I'm going to move it over to where my camera's at. I'm going to flatten it out quite a bit, not completely. However, probably a little too close to the camera. And that looks pretty good there, except you see I have this flat line back here. That has to do with the angle of the camera. And if you want to get rid of that, you can just rotate the terrain just a touch until that horizon line sinks behind the hill. And we'll start with this. Okay, so now what we want to do, we're going to be creating a path through a forest, but we want to create the undergrowth. And to do that, I'm going to use some ecosystems. But first, let's put something down that looks like dirt. Because right now, if we look at it here in the preview window, it's just sort of this light grayish color. So we'll just select something real quick under landscapes. And I like to use this dry clay. And it's still a bit bright. We'll darken it up to make it look like a rich forest soil. So down to about there. And that's good enough right there. Most of it you won't be able to see. It'll be covered by plants. So now I'm going to double click on that. And we're going to click this ecosystem here. And that's going to add an ecosystem to our dry clay. And we're going to go to the general tab and we'll add a plant. We'll just add, you don't need to add a whole lot of plants for the undergrowth, just a couple. One of my favorites is this sort of fern-looking plant right here. Small grassfield plant 3, so we'll start with that. And set the scale up to 1. And I'm going to use this paint thing here because I just want to test a few things, how a couple of them look. So now I click paint, and I make sure I have single instance selected here. And I'll just drop in a couple instances and check with the preview window to see if they showed up. And it didn't show up very much. They're probably too small. Actually, here's part of my problem is that I have this set to a really small number here in the ecosystem painter. Let's set the scale to 1. That's clear. And then I'll add a couple more now. Now I can kind of see how big they're going to be just here, which is still too small. So let's clear that. We'll go back over to here and we'll set the scale up to 3. And now we'll try dropping a few in. And that looks a bit better. So you can always do a preview render if you'd like. That's a pretty good size there. Let's give these a bit more of a randomness to them. Let's first of all clear that up. And under scaling and orientation, if you do this, this will make the plants grow out either pointing towards the sky or pointing straight away from the terrain. I like them pointing straight away. That'll make them kind of point just slightly in different directions. All right, we're going to go back to General tab, and I'm going to add another plant. We'll add this spring hollyhock. Okay. And we'll start with a scale of 3. Now I'm going to set the presence of the fern down to 0. So only the spring hollyhock's going to show up because we just want to see the size of that right now. And we'll go with our single instance. Let's do this a little bit bigger. Let's do a big preview render just to kind of see what that looks like. I think that's a bit too big. I think we'll go with about 60% of that size. So we'll double click here again, clear, and we'll do that down at 2. And we'll drop in a couple more instances just for an experiment. And we'll give that a quick preview. I like the size of that better. Okay, we'll drop one more plant in. So we'll set that presence down to 0 also. And we'll add in... here we go. Long grass. And we'll start with setting that up at scale of 3 also. And we'll try dropping in a few of those. I'm thinking those are going to be too big, just looking at what the at the preview. That's way too big. So let's drop that down to let's say about 0.5, because that needs to be small. Let's see how that looks over here. Perhaps a bit too small. So we'll go with 1. That's how this works. You just sort of experiment till you find something you like. Now let's see how that looks. It's still a bit big. Let's reduce that size just a tiny bit more. So 0.5 was too small, 1 is too big, and we'll do 0.75 then. And we'll stick with that. Now under scaling here, this is how how large everything's going to be. We've already got the overall scale how we want it, but this will set a variation, and I want some more variation in the size of my undergrowth here. We'll just set it up to 1.5, and then we're just going to cover this landscape here. Let's actually go back down to the 4 view so we can see the whole thing. Now, one of the reasons I like using the paint is that I could just sit here and hit populate, but this is probably going to create millions of instances, well, a couple of thousand. But we'd have to set the density up, and that's going to create 12,000 instances, which is going to be pretty rough on the rendering on the CPU. So I can clear that, and if I just use paint and paint just the area I see, and we'll put that on brush. Make sure limit density is unchecked, and the brush flow is pretty high. Then all I got to do is pass over what the camera sees. I'm going to have probably quite a lot. Instead of tens of thousands, I have just 3,000 instances. So let's give a preview render, and let's see how our forest floor looks now. Okay, I can see already that everything looks way too big. And it's mostly that grass, I think. So let's cut that grass down a lot. It's a bit unpredictable, the long grass. Set down to 0.3. And actually, I don't want that much grass. So, and here's something I forgot to do: setting the presence of everything up to. I want mostly ferns, about half as many of the spring hollyhock, and maybe only 1/5 as much of the long grass. Now let's see how that looks. Now I'm guessing I'm not going to like that. Maybe it'll turn out okay. Let's have a look. Okay, the ferns tended to dominate a little too much, and they're still a bit too big. So we'll reduce that down to 2, maybe. And just knowing that everything else seems to have come in too large, we'll do that. So let's also increase this up to 0.7, maybe. And 0.4. And let's see how that turned out. And that looks pretty good size-wise and distribution of our various plant types. I mean, you can't tell a whole lot from a preview render, but you can kind of see that, you get used to what you see and what you like. So let's cover the rest of this landscape here. If it starts to get a little bit hard on your CPU to show these instances in the preview render, you can, let's close our painter here. You can set this display options to none, and you just see dots where the plants are, and it makes it a lot easier for your graphics display card to handle it. All right, so now we're going to create the path going down, going through this landscape here. And to do that, we're going to use the same thing, the ecosystem painter. Now, some newer versions of Vue have something called splines, but I have a version that's a little too old for that. But you don't need them. You can just take the eraser. Let's get the radius down a little bit smaller. And just sort of come in here and draw in your path. You want to kind of make it wider as it gets closer to the camera. Give it the sort of the concept of a vanishing point. And if maybe it's a little too wide in the background, you can always go back to your brush and brush in some detail here. Alright, so let's give that a preview render. Actually, let's just look at it in the window over here. Looks like it's going to be a little bit too thin. Let's thicken that up a little, or let's widen that path a bit. Let's go back to our eraser here. Alright, so let's see how that turned out. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. So let's throw in a couple of trees in the foreground, and for that I'm just going to manually add some trees. And I don't want the tree canopy to really interfere with the foreground too much, so I'm going to find a tree that has a long trunk, not a lot of low branches. And for that I like to use, let's see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. The Scots pine. Now, Scots pine's not perfect. In post-production, you have to fix the bark sometimes. And we got to figure out where that went. There it is. And make it pretty large. And plant it in the ground. Now it looks like it's on top of it here, but if you switch to maybe the terrain, you can see if you've actually obscured the roots. Okay, now we're getting those roots down in there. And actually, that's probably fine because the plants are going to cover the ground cover is probably going to cover that up. And then to duplicate this tree, I'm just going to hold down the Alt key and drag, and give it a spin. So we don't want too many trees in the foreground, but we do need a few. And I'm just going to do the same thing here. Like I said, just give it a spin to make it look not too much like its brothers. All right, we'll put one more up here at the top of the hill. So just hold down the Alt key again. Actually, let's make this one bigger. So it looks like I have a big fatter trunk, even though it's off a little further away. Maybe one more right around here somewhere. So we'll just hold down the Alt key again, one more drag. And let's make it a bit smaller. We have, let's move this tree so it's not obscured so much. And that'll make a pretty good foreground there. Now we have a decision to make on the background. There's a couple things we can do. We can close it in, basically make it thick forest back there so it looks like this is a path leading into the forest, or we can open it up by just putting a little bit of trees back there. So we'll start with just opening it up, and to do that I'm just going to pick a tree that has a pretty dense canopy. I like to use this white oak here, and we'll let that load. Make it a bit bigger, drag it behind our terrain, and we'll just duplicate it a couple of times, each time giving it some rotation. Accidentally resized it instead of rotating it. Okay, there we go. And hold down the Alt key and drag. And then maybe let's move that a little bit more centered. One more. Now if you look at the quick preview, you get this sense that you're kind of emerging from a forest into a clearing. Now if you're going to do this, you're probably going to want to put something off in the distance. So for that, we'll just throw in a terrain. And we'll give it a a grassy texture. And we'll make that a quick ecosystem. And we'll add the same old white oak tree. And I'm just going to populate for this one. That's way too big. Let's make it a lot smaller. There we go. So now it'll look like there's more forest off in the distance, but we've emerged into a clearing. So we're coming over this rise. There'll be some small field or something like that. If you want to make it look even wider, you can always just move this back. And that's going to fade more as it gets further away from the camera. Or you can always make the tree smaller. So that's one way to do it. Now another thing you could do is close the forest in. And to do that, we'll move this terrain up close to the our foreground terrain. And you can just increase the size of the trees. We'll go pretty large here. And perhaps the density as well. And now these trees close it in. And now we have a closed in forest. And you have some depth in there. Which you may have something appearing back here. And I think we'll do that. We'll keep this darker looking forest here. And we'll add some sort of animal to it. So we'll jump over to Poser and pick something. So let's go to Poser. Okay, so here we are in Poser, and I'm going to just delete the default character here. And we're going to load an animal, and I have a pretty good library of animals here. I think we'll put a deer in here. We'll use Lyne's deer, which I believe this one's free, and I'll have a link to this in the notes where you can get this. It's a pretty good set of figures for doing deer. And we'll just do the buck. Yeah, that's a pretty good looking buck there. We'll just give it a quick pose. I'm not going to do a whole lot to it. And I'm just using the rotate tool here and just moving its legs around a bit. Okay, so it's got the inverse kinematics on the back legs. So I'll just take advantage of that and use that to pose its feet. And we'll maybe give him a sideways look. We're not going to spend too much time here. Side side, give it a twist. Oh, there we go. Let's maybe move these front feet together a little bit more. There we go. Well, that's a good enough pose for now, and we'll just save that off. Save as, and we'll just put this on the desktop. And we'll just call it deer. And with that, we'll go back to Vue. Okay, so here we are back in Vue, and let's load that deer up. And you can do that by clicking on this cube here with an arrow and the arrow down here. This will put us in a file select menu. We're just going to go all the way up to the desktop where we save that deer. And here it is. Now the first time you import something from Vue, I've done it so many times you don't see it, but it'll ask you a few questions and you have to find your Poser. I'm sorry, the first time you import something into Vue from Poser, you'll sometimes have to do some settings, and you'll have to figure out where the Poser executable is. Let me show you that real quick. And you can always redo that under the options. And I believe it's under General Preferences. Configure Poser Import. So you can see here I have it set up to go to my old Poser 6 executable, which works fine for me. The newer ones should work too, though. So anyway, let's import that deer. And just click no if that message happens to pop up. And we didn't have any animation or any cloth room stuff, so we'll just import frame 0. And there it is. It looks like it came in a bit small, so we'll make it bigger. And we'll just drop it on the ground. Let's actually put it just behind the hill. Maybe make him a tiny bit smaller since our path isn't that wide. Maybe hide his backside behind that tree a little. I'm going to turn him a little bit more towards the viewer. And let's give that a preview render and see how that looks. He looks pretty good where he's positioned. I think I'm looking at these tree trunks, and the default texture looks a tad loose for me, so I'm going to go select those. And then we've got a few textures here. I'm going to just tighten them up a bit. I think all we have to do is, let's see, what do we have here? Yeah, we really just got to worry about this one, the bark. I'm going to set it down to like 0.3. See if that tightens it up. Alright, you can't tell too well, but I'm thinking the bark looks a bit, being that this is a preview mode, but I'm thinking the bark looks a bit better, a little bit more like real tree bark, but it's still a bit bright, so we'll darken that up too. And for that, we'll just go to the color here and just drag this slider down into a darker color. And we'll do it with this one as well. Maybe gray that a bit. Now just check it out in the preview window, sorry. And that looks pretty good color-wise. I'll do one more preview render. Alright, and I think I like this. We got the deer, and the deer, he's framed by these trees in the ground here, so he's got kind of a section that highlights him. You got a pretty good sense of depth. I like the way the path comes towards the viewer. So I think it's time we send this to full render. So to do that, I'm just going to click and hold up here on the camera and bring up the render options. And the final preset's always been enough for me, so I'm going to set it to final. And then render to screen. And we'll give this a really large size. We'll go up to 6200 by 4133. This is going to give us an enormous print size if we want it. And that should be it. Since we're going to do this size and it's going to render for a pretty long time, maybe we'll, just for safety's sake, auto-save the render. And I like to do it every 600 minutes. And don't forget to save the depth map. So every 10 hours, this is going to save a file, and it if the render takes 20 hours, it'll save 2 files, and it'll end with .001 and .002. So it's a good way in case you have to worry about a power outage or something like that, that at least you get some part of it rendered if you have a really long render. So we'll click that OK, and we'll kick off the render. So we'll be back in a few days to see how it turned out. Okay, so the render finished. It actually finished reasonably quick, just 6 hours and 47 minutes. So we're going to save this off now. And to do that, we just click on the little thing that looks like a floppy disk here. And I'm going to save it to the desktop. Forest path.bmp is fine. And now we're also going to save the depth map. And the depth map is a grayscale image. And you can't see much here, but if I zoom out a bit, it's a grayscale image that represents how deep the objects are in the scene. Darker objects are closer to the camera, lighter objects are further away. And we can use this in post-production to do some nice tricks. So we'll save that off. Same thing, I just put it on the desktop, and it automatically puts this _Z in the name here. And with that, it's saved off, and we'll go to post-production. Okay, so here we are in GIMP to do some post-production work. You see here I have our file loaded, our image, as well as the depth map. And I'm going to go over here to the depth map real quick. We're going to separate the foreground from the background. And to do that, I'm going to go up here to Colors and click Threshold. And you get a histogram of the color spread here. And you can see this gap here. So here you have the background and the foreground. And we'll fall into this gap right here. And you can see now we just have the foreground showing. So click OK, and we're going to select all, copy that, and go over to our main image and paste. Now that's going to create a floating selection or a pasted layer, and we want to create an actual layer. Then to do that, you just click on this little piece of paper looking thing down here. And we're going to do select by color and select the black. And now we're just going to delete that whole layer. And now you can see we have our foreground selected. So we just copy and paste. And that creates another floating selection. So we'll solidify that layer. And now we have the background separated from the foreground. And we can put something in between if we want. So let's maybe throw in sort of a layer of fog. So we'll create a new layer and put it between those two. And we'll pick go to the airbrush. Actually, let's go to the background first. And let's just use the color picker tool. I'm going to sort of find the lightest color I can find back there, and that's, I guess, about that. And maybe get a grayer, slightly lighter version of that. That'll be our fog color. You don't want it to be flat white, might be a little bit too bright. So now we'll go to the airbrush tool, and I have some fog brushes, if I can find them in my brush palette here. Oh, here they are. And we'll just pick one of those. Actually, it's smoke brushes. And we'll create a reasonably large brush. So we'll get the size up there pretty high. Let's go up to about 1,000. That's good. And click on our layer there. And now we'll just brush in some fog. Especially along the ground. Fog tends to settle towards the ground. And you don't have to cover the whole thing, just sort of pick some spots here and there. And with the airbrush tool, if you just go a little bit slower, it gets a bit thicker in those areas. And that looks pretty good right there just for our fog layer. Now let's have some fun and let's put some sunshine breaking through the trees. And to do that, I'll create another layer. Click OK. And I'm going to click this free select tool. I'm just going to go up here to the top corner somewhere, click, and then click down on this side somewhere, and just do a couple more clicks. What I'm going to do, just basically outlining where some sunbeams would be. And being careful to go around the outside of the image here. Although I guess it doesn't matter. It's in the foreground will cover that up. So now we have this sort of selected area. And I'm going to go with a bright yellowish color. Maybe not quite that saturated. There we go. And back to our airbrush tool. And I'll just keep it on the smoke brush. I'm just going to go down along in there. And that creates some sunbeams. Now I'm going to soften the edges of these. And if you don't, if you don't like it, we can always create more or remove it, because we do have it as a separate layer, so you can always just destroy the layer. But to soften the edges, I like to just use the eraser tool and just a nice soft round brush. And just kind of go along the edge. And decrease that size to get in between these two. Let's see how that looks. Let's remove that selection. And I think it's maybe a bit too yellow, so we can always fix that. Maybe just make it brighter. And if you want, you can go crazy, create a lot of beams. If it still looks maybe a little too hard here, I can come back in with the eraser. A little bit more right here. All right, that looks pretty good there. Now the tree trunks have a little bit of error in them in the texture here, so we can fix that pretty quick. Just go to the foreground, and we just use the clone tool. We'll keep our fuzzy brush, maybe make it a bit smaller, and then go to a part of the tree that's not so bad. Hold down the control key and click, and then just go over here where this flawed area is and just kind of erase it out. You maybe borrow from another part of the tree if things don't look that good. Like I said, just go over it. Just go over kind of eliminating those errors. Sometimes you get that with these the tree bark in some of these Vue trees. Okay, one last thing we're going to do is maybe fix the fur on this deer a little bit. And to do that, I'll just make sure I'm still in the foreground layer. And I'm going to do the smudge brush. And I'm going to pick one of these, let's see, what is this? This very light bristle brush maybe. Make it a reasonably smaller size. And for this I'm going to have to zoom in. So let's zoom in. And I'm just going to take this smudge brush, and it needs to be smaller than that. Let's go down to about 20. Actually, let's increase the rate up to about 75. This is the smudge rate. And wherever I see these straight lines here, I kind of break them up. What you're seeing here is artifacts from the polygon mesh that the deer is made from. And along the outside, brush this fur out a bit. And this brush might be a bit too soft, so let's see if I can find a harder brush. Let's try this one here. Ah, that's better. And just break up these hard lines. Now, I may fast forward the video here just a bit because this could take a little bit of time. So we'll be back in a second, and I'll go over this whole deer. Like I said, just fixing the lines, just with little subtle brush work, just to make sure he doesn't look too much like a 3D object, as opposed we want it to look more like a painting. Okay, so I've gone along the whole deer, fixing the various parts where there was some evidence of the underlying polygon mesh, and I've also gone along the edges here and kind of fluffed the fur out just a little bit. I kept it pretty subtle along the back, made it a little bit more obvious underneath, around the knees and ankles. But yeah, just give that deer a more painted look. And one last thing I'm going to do is put some highlight on its eyes. And to do that, I just picked kind of a soft brush and a reasonably small size, about 15-ish, and just put a little smudge. That's probably a bit too much there. Sometimes it takes a little bit of practice with your hands. A little smudge there, and then I'm going to go with a darker color and kind of do the same over here for the reverse light. That's perhaps a bit too strong. So let's undo that, Control Z, and let's set the opacity down to about 50%. There. That just gives that eye a little bit of, makes it look a little bit wetter, rounder. Oh, one last thing I sometimes like to do is just to sort of test the whole value range. But the first thing I'm going to do is flatten all the layers. So now we have one solid image. I'm going to go into colors here and levels. And I can see here that there's a section of dark in the values that's been left out. So I can just drag this up. That gives us definitely a much richer thing. Perhaps a little bit too dark in the midtones, so we'll drag the midtones down a little. Okay, and now we have a more full range of we've more thoroughly covered the range of values. So with that, I think we'll call this image done, and we'll move on to uploading it to a print-on-demand site. I'm going to use Fine Art America, which is my favorite, and we'll see you there. Okay, so here we are on Fine Art America. I've logged into my account. I'm going to show you how, now that we've finished our artwork, how we can upload it and make it available for sale. So I'm going to click on the images. I've clicked on my profile here, and now I'm in the images section. And I'm going to click on Upload Image, choose File, and I'll get to our desktop. And here's our file, forestpath.jpg. And we upload. Okay, so it's uploaded. Now we're just going to fill out some information for our artwork. We have to give it a title, and for the title you want to be careful to use some good keywords, because this will be something that the search engines pick up on. So you might be tempted to have like a nice poetic title, but really what you want is something that really describes the scene. Deer on a forest path is probably a good one for this. So we have a path, a forest, and a deer. So we've described kind of the three major pieces of this artwork. All right, keywords. These are the keywords that Fine Art America's internal search engine uses. You can be pretty detailed here. You have 500 characters. I'll come back later and fill some in, so we don't have to spend 20 minutes here watching me fill in keywords. We'll just do deer, forest, and path for now. Now the description is something that you also want to make keyword rich. This will be something that Google picks up on. For now, I'm just going to do something like this, but on a forest path. Later on, I'll come back in and give a nice detailed description, maybe talk about how I made this, the predominant colors, just a lot of stuff to help draw in search engines, but also, I mean, it should be humanly readable, and it should, appeal to your potential buyers. So, spend some time coming up with a good description. Display options never enable the watermark. It drives away sales, and if somebody wants, it's there to prevent people from stealing your artwork online. But if somebody wants to steal it, they'll work around they would work around a watermark anyway. Do have the enable full resolution preview checked. That allows visitors to zoom in on parts of your work to get a closer look. Work safe viewing is if you have adult material. This is not. I have lots of subgalleries here. We'll drop this one in the wildlife subgallery. I'm also a member of a lot of groups on the Fine Art America site, and you could submit to groups for the admins to review and maybe feature. I'm not going to do this right now, but I might come back in later and submit this to some groups. For the category, it's digital art, and I have a preset to always land on digital art. Originals, we're not selling an original because it's digital art. There is no original. Print products, well, of course the main one is prints, and I already have markups set here. So I'm going to keep these, but this is the important part. This is what you make if a print sells. And there's other things you can set markups for, like greeting cards, throw pillows, duvet covers, phone cases. I'm just going to leave this pretty much like it is. And we also have this here. This is the image licensing program on pixels.com. If you do stuff that might look good on a novel cover or on the side of a teacup or something, you might look into this program. This allows people with commercial interests to buy the rights to use your image on their products. It's a pretty neat program. And if we wanted to send this out on Facebook and Twitter to do some marketing, we could do that here too. But I'm not going to do this right now because it's just before midnight Eastern time. It's not really a good time to market stuff. Instead, I'm going to show you something else, how to market this on Facebook at a more opportune time. So we'll submit it. And just like that, it's up for sale. So somebody could log in or somebody could come to this site and buy a print. So I'm going to show you real quick how you can market this on Facebook at a different time from when you upload it. So we'll jump over to Facebook here. And I'll get onto my Facebook fan page. Let's go back here real quick. I'm just going to copy this link and paste it right here into a Facebook status update. And now I don't want to post it right now. What I'm going to do is schedule this for 8 p.m. tomorrow, which might be a good time that shoppers are more likely to be online. So we'll go to tomorrow's Friday the 13th. Maybe not the best day to post it, but we'll give it a shot. And we'll set that for 8 o'clock p.m. and schedule it. And just like that, it's set to go out tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. So that'll show you a little bit of marketing there. All right, everybody. I think that's we'll call it a night now. So thanks and good night. So if you like this video and you'd like to see more, or read some of my articles, or even check out some of my art, you can find me on my blog at www.introvertartist.com. And here I post articles on how to make art, how to sell it online, tools that you can use. I have links to my gallery, as well as you can subscribe to my newsletter here. And my newsletter is something I send out every Wednesday with news on my latest artworks, articles, videos, promotions, discounts, and I even throw in a free computer wallpaper every week. So thanks, everybody, and good night.